So when you wrote this, you didn't flush out all of the characters completely. Kathy was. But I understand Tom Hardy wanted a little bit more for he wanted to be Kathy, right?
That's true. Well, Kathy's certainly the kind of the lead character, and she's our narrator of this whole piece. And, I had a lot of her, the woman that inspired her, a lot of those words were from the book. So I think it was really easy to pick up that script and say, okay, well, this is a fully formed character. When it came to Tom Hardy's role, I didn't have as many, real references to include in the script. So a lot of that was just fiction. A lot of that was just created. And I think when he came on board, he realized in order to kind of get to the level that Kathy was at, which was, very verbose, he'd have to bring a lot of himself to the role. He'd have to bring a lot more to the role to kind of flesh it out and fill it out. And he did just that.
I'm thinking of starting a writing club.
Why? All those clubs do is sit around talking about motorcycles.
That's what we do. You don't belong nowhere else, so we belong together. You're the man in charge. I'm John.
And you wanted him to do that with the other cast members too, right? You wanted them to kind of take off on it?
Yeah, Michael Shannon's character, for example, he has a couple of big monologues in the film, and those are both really directly inspired by, interviews from the book. So that's an example where his character had a lot to work with from the original material. But there weren't any interviews with Vinny in the book, which is Austin Butler's character. So all of that starts to become, fiction. That starts to become me trying to figure out, okay, if we're in this world and we have these comments about, their life from these interviews, these other characters, how do they fit in, and what do they sound like, and what's making them tick? That was a lot of the creative input that I added.
I like you guys.
Boyfriends are getting into trouble.
So, a movie about working class white men. You don't see too much of that these days. That process of taking these guys from friends and a club to a gang is an interesting journey, and how do you reference that in your mind to create those relationships and that path?
Well, that really came from a second foreword that Danny Lyons wrote for a 2003 reissue of the book. And he went back and he tried to find out what had happened to some of the guys he rode with and what had happened to the club that he rode with. And in doing so, he talked about kind of the violent end to one of the guys that started the club. And he said, that was the end of the club that I rode with in 1965. Even though the club itself kept going, really the nature of it changed. And that was really compelling to me. That felt like the shape of a movie, In a broader sense, it felt like a beginning, middle, and end, You have this social club that then it just metastasizes over time. That felt like something I could build a narrative out of.
When you made the movie, what characters or which actors really got into being on a motorcycle and decked out with the makeup and the hair and the whole thing?
Well, almost all of them, but I have to give special credit to Carl Glusman. He plays a character called Corky. He had been a motorcycle rider, but he hadn't really ridden older bikes like this, and he just went to town. I think he was friends with Jason Momoa, who had a lot of older bikes, and apparently Jason gave him some older bikes to ride even before he came to us. So by the time he got to us, he was one of the best we had. Yeah, Carl Glusman, and he's an incredible young actor.
Well, I believe Austin Butler was a little bit scared of going too fast in a cornfield. Did you have to talk to him?
Well, yeah. I mean, they were all scared because riding on these bikes, none of these bikes had disc brakes. Most of them didn't have snapback throttles. None of that was standardized on a bike at the time. So when you put 40 of them together, and you, Tom Hardy, or Austin Butler at the front of that pack, and you're realizing how hard it is to stop that bike, and you realize there are 39 guys behind you that are just having just as much trouble, gets in your head a little bit for sure. But they all did great. They were all pros by the end.